Welcome to 28.5 Women's Basketball, where we explore a unique and authentic perspective on the women's game, break down upcoming matchups, and discuss the latest news and trends in women's basketball. We are your hosts. I'm Sydney Story, and I played basketball at the University of Tennessee under Pat Summitt.
And I'm Becca Goodman, and I played at the University of Notre Dame under Muffet McGraw. And we're thrilled to have you join us today. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to tune in each week and don't forget to follow, download, and listen to give an assist and share the love. Now let's get started with today's episode.
Becca, how's it going? How you been?
Things are good. It's been a sunny week, and we are in the grind of women's basketball. I'll say that. How about you?
I'm doing well. We are really seeing some of those teams take on the full weight of conference play right now. And I think we've talked about it a lot on how much of a grind and all the wear and tear that conference play can take. And we're seeing some of that, but boy, are we seeing those top teams in those conferences hold strong. And we're excited to highlight some of that today.
Yeah, for sure. It's been different just because in the beginning there was quite a bit that stood out, right? But that grind, as we mentioned, and the consistency you have to have, we're really starting to see what I think this week is just like underdog week. I without a doubt believe that. There's been quite a few upsets, and I know we'll jump into those here in a bit.
And it's hard to believe we're 6, maybe 7 weeks away from Selection Sunday.
Yeah. That's the scary part. So this grind is the end of regular conference play before the conference tourney. So like all of these games from now matter. It can move you up. It can move you down. Not that games early on didn't, but this is really AKA the grind, the most important part of the season. It's how you finish, and you want to be peaking at that end. For some of these teams, it's make or break time for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, let's jump into today's episode. We've got an action-packed episode, full 4 quarters here. First quarter, we are going to highlight the South Carolina versus Tennessee game. Second quarter, we're going to talk about some underdog upsets, as well as some of the changes in the top 25, the ups and the downs that are happening there within the AP poll. Third quarter, we're going to talk about the dominant teams in the Power 4 conferences right now. So we're going to highlight UCLA, South Carolina, Notre Dame, and UConn, and just some overall stats and things we've seen in conference play. In our fourth quarter, we're going to talk about some upcoming NCAA games that are coming this weekend. So really a full action-packed, as I mentioned, episode, and let's get started. So the Tennessee versus South Carolina game, I have to say, I thought Tennessee could hold their own a little bit more here, being a home game for Tennessee and the style of play and what Tennessee can bring there. Tennessee ends up losing this one by 7 points, a score of 70-63. And really, it was a slow start-ish for South Carolina. The first half of the first quarter, I thought Tennessee played a little bit better. I thought they were holding their own. South Carolina, sure enough, goes on an 8-0 run to end the first quarter. They also had a 14-0 run in the second quarter. And you and I have talked about this a ton. You cannot have those deep runs, let those deep runs happen and expect to win ball games. And I thought those 2 runs in the first half alone really almost solidified the game for Tennessee. And we've talked about how Tennessee can come back because of their style of play, because they sub 5 in, 5 out, because they hit the 3 ball and look to shoot a ton of threes, because they run that full court press. And they do cut it back to within 7 to end the game. And I think cut it even to 6 at one point down the stretch in the fourth quarter. But I would love Tennessee to come out and play a game where they're in control for 4 full quarters. And we've talked about how Tennessee was able to do that up front before conference play because their non-conference schedule was a little bit weaker. So we saw that all the time, right? Most teams they were playing, they were at least able to put together 3 solid quarters, if not 4 solid quarters. But now that we've gotten into conference play, Tennessee struggled a little bit against some of these good opponents. As crazy of the style is that they play, you've seen good teams like an LSU, like a South Carolina, like an Oklahoma be able to beat Tennessee in the style that they're throwing out there. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on the whole thing and just looking at it and watching a lot of those games. I will say South Carolina is now 129-4 in the last 4 seasons. You talk about dominance there. Like Only 4 teams have been able to beat South Carolina, or they've lost 4 games in 4 seasons. I mean, it's just really amazing what they're doing there.
Yeah, that's honestly, that stat line is insane. I also think their gameplay is also super interesting, right? So South Carolina, when you look at the points and the amount of minutes, they're going to their bench. They have 3 that they're bringing in from the bench who are playing 20 to 30 minutes. So it's not like they're not using their bench or you only have people popping in and out. They're actively going there and expanding that roster to having that awesome core 8. And I think that's huge. Tennessee, we know their style. We've seen it. What I loved is obviously the 3 ball was atrocious this game. Like it just was, right? It was. I think we can say that's been their bread and butter. That's been their game style. But I love to see, and I think I yelled at the TV a couple times, drive to the basket, get a pull up. And when they did that towards the end of
Yeah,
the game,
absolutely.
they chipped away at that 22-point lead like it was nothing. So then you saw a different style and capability of a Tennessee Lady Vol team. And it's like, holy crap, like that's amazing to have the ability to pull 3-pointers all day, but also have that athleticism to make reads, drive to the basket, get pull-ups, and distribute to who's open. Like imagine that style of play combined. That would be a very dangerous team. Very dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. And if you look at the depth of South Carolina, and we've said this from day one, the very first game we watched this season, South Carolina, how deep they were and the bench points they put out there. And they have done that consistently throughout the season. So I want to ask you, do you think South Carolina is the deepest team in the country? And does anyone even come close?
That's a really good question. Do 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 do. I mean,
I know.
I think they're deep. I think the scary part to me, and this is literally as I say it, I'm like, how does this make sense? I think Tennessee is in extremely deep. I think and they've set that precedent from the 5 and 5 out the whole season. They've done that. It's just the style of play, the IQ and the gameplay that they're missing. And I don't know, I don't think you can jam it in here in a month. Maybe you can. Maybe watching that game against you're playing South Carolina. They're number 2. They haven't, you just said their record 104 and 4 or 100 and some, and right. So you were down 22 to them. Not many teams come back to with even single digits after that, right?
Yep.
So back to your question. Yes, I think South Carolina is deep, but I honestly, in some weird way, I think Tennessee's extremely deep. They consistently play 2 to 3 people off their bench that get 20 minutes, and they always play 10. Always. There's nobody that doesn't play unless they're hurt or sick, right? Like they're in and out.
The depth of Tennessee, I think they have it, but it doesn't necessarily stack up to the South Carolina depth and what they bring. I mean, the amount of All-Americans are on South Carolina's team, it's just unbelievable. What I think helps Tennessee next year is the recruiting class they have coming in.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And I think that's going to be a huge difference when you're trying to play this 5 in, 5 out style. Just building that depth a little bit more, I think, is going to be, especially if you're going to run that style, I think it's going to be very important in the future here. So I think that's maybe where we see some of this Kim Caldwell style really take off. And granted, it's her first year implementing this system. She had a lot of transfers that came in that she had technically recruited, but now she's got more time to get recruits in. They'll hit the transfer portal again, because I think every team at this point pretty much does to some extent. Yeah. And so that'll be interesting to see how they reload I'm not trying to look past this season, but I just don't think we're stacking up to the cream of the crop right now. And as a Lady Vol myself, not that it's a wasted season, but we expect to make Final Fours and championships. And I just don't think we're of that caliber yet. Upsets happen, don't get me wrong, especially in the tournament. But I think this hurts us for our seed, and I think it makes it that much tougher to make Final Fours for sure. So just
Sid, at what point if you're the head coach, your team for the game is 3 of 26 from the 3-point line. But I think honestly by halftime or maybe even the third quarter, they were like 2 of 18, 2 of 20 from 3. At what point do you change or say something to get them to give you something else? Or do you just ride till you die the shoot the three. If you're open, pull it until someone gets hot.
Well, you know my style. I teach the basic pick and roll, two-man game. Let's overload one side. I mean, I run offense like Pat ran offense, right? So I have a whole different approach to that. And I was a three-point shooter. Right? Like
You
the
would want
style
them
I would have
threes.
loved.
Exactly.
I think they doubled down on it because at some point, it had to have been towards the end of the third, into the fourth quarter, you see Tess Darby back to back times throw up a three ball. She goes 0 for 3 in total for the game, but I think it was very clear that it was like, hey, Tess, when you touch it, we need you starting to fire them, and they come up empty on all three of those possessions. Like, I just think they tried to double down on it even more, even though three ball wasn't working. Yeah. Right. So it's interesting.
It was rough. I'm just glad they changed the style and they started driving. I'm glad that that's something new that Tennessee hasn't done, but they've also not been challenged in order to like have to make that change in order to stay in a game. This was the first one. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll be it'll be a plan B when they get jumping into a game and they're struggling. All right, Sid, I have to ask, since you're a mom of 2, could you imagine having a baby and then within a week coming back to coach and being on the court, coaching full go, turn up, roll with it?
Yeah, man, this is some controversy for sure. I cannot personally. And I'm a recent mom of 2. I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, went back to back. I also had C-sections. I don't know Kim Caldwell's situation, so I was probably more on the extreme side of the recovery portion of giving birth. But everyone feels differently and has a different birthing story. That's for sure. I also don't judge her for her decision. I hope that she made the decision for herself and she felt like she was good to go. That doesn't bother me. I just think it's an opportunity for women nowadays to set more of a precedent that it's not expected. So as long as that was clear to me, which I'm not sure, I didn't listen to the post-game press conference or anything like that, and she might have talked about it. I think it's important that women, especially who are coaches nowadays, aren't expected to come back within a week. Because there is a lot going on. That baby is really dependent on you. You are feeding that child every 2 to 3 hours. I don't know the situation, right? If she's using formula or if she's nursing the child, whatever it might be. But regardless, that child needs you. So to be gone for that span of time, it's definitely possible. We all have different support systems. I'm sure 100% the baby was totally fine for those hours that she was away. But you also have that time with your child and your newborn. You're getting to know each other. You don't get that time back. So it is like this, like, I go back and forth on my own experiences and the bonding time. And at that point, maybe she just wanted a little bit of a break too. And this is like her way out. So like, I see both sides. I just don't want that to be the norm where women think they need to come back and be on the sideline and coaching right away, because it's not just the game that happened on Monday, but then at that point, it's kind of expected that she's at all the games going forward. So a week to me, not enough time in my situation for what I went through giving birth. But in her situation, maybe it made sense. I hope it did, and she went for it. So kudos to her. That's a strong woman right there.
Yeah. And everyone's different. So props to her and welcome to her son, Conor Scott Caldwell. And look forward to probably seeing him in some Tennessee Lady Vol gear. Hey, can I tell a quick story of what I heard about a Pat Summitt story?
Yeah, go for it.
I saw this. It was like Good Morning America or something. And I guess when Coach Summitt was pregnant with her son, Tyler, she was out on a recruiting trip. Do you know this story?
Yeah, it was like one of Pat's favorite stories to tell, for sure.
You should tell it. You should tell it, because I might get it wrong.
Okay, so Pat had a few miscarriages leading up to Tyler. So I know that we all go through different fertility journeys, but Pat definitely had a rough go at it. But with Tyler was the one for her only kid. And she had lost to, I think it was Virginia in the Final Four or national championship or something like that. It was a close game. So she was on a recruiting visit, and she was doing the home visit. The way she tells the story, she went into labor in their living room and was like, hey, we got to get on the plane. We got to go. And so gets on the plane, and the pilot's like, we're going to land this thing. And she's like, absolutely, we are not landing this plane until I'm in the state of Tennessee. certainly not over the state of Virginia.
Yes.
Wherever they were flying. That's just the competitor and Pat. I think I heard her story. She's told the story. I think I probably heard it 10 different times. A great story. And Tyler was born, and there you go.
That's hilarious. Just comparing then to now, right? You have Pat Summitt in the air. The pilot's like, hey, we should really land. No, I am not having this baby in Virginia. We just lost to them. Give me to Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. I can see her doing it. I love it. I think that's a great story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So everyone, I mean, different experiences, and Kim Caldwell, I'm sure, chose her own destiny there. So Good for her. That's great.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's jump into our second quarter. So I'm going to try to keep this as streamlined as possible because it's a lot, folks. This quarter is called Underdog Upsets. We at one point last week had 7 ranked teams lose all on the same night. Think about that for rankings and where we're at in the game and, consistency. So I'm going to go through the unranked teams that had the upset, that actually won the game. So Mississippi State, unranked, upset number 10 Oklahoma. That's a huge one. Absolutely massive. That's a top 10 team. We've talked a lot about Oklahoma. Great post play. Kind of on the come up, right? They lost to Mississippi State. And then we have an unranked Virginia Tech, upset number 13 Georgia Tech. Unranked Illinois, upset at number 23 Iowa. An unranked Texas A&M, upset number 11 Kentucky. Unranked Michigan beat, at the time, it was the number 23 Minnesota. And then last unranked is Oklahoma State, upset number 9 TCU. So keep in mind, TCU has Haley Van Lith, Sedona Prince, best start to the program in history, and got upset by an unranked. So hypothetically, all those right there, no, not fact, all unranked teams beating ranked. And it's not that they're, a 25 and 24 and 19. These are a 10, a 13 and 11 and a 9. This completely shakes up their whole rankings. Now we have some ranked teams. Number 19 UNC upset number 14 Duke in overtime. Number 24 Cal upset number 21 NC State. Florida State also was unranked at the time and upset number 13 UNC. And then number 12 Ohio State beat number 8 Maryland. Okay, I got them all out. I think we hit them all. But think about that as your top 25. And then you have that set and that group fighting for getting ranked, spots for the tournament. March Madness is around the corner. These are make or break times. I'm not saying one of these is going to end somebody's season. It's just going to change where possibly, Illinois, they might now be a 16 or 15 seed in the tournament, which maybe they were on the bubble, not going to make it. Anything you want to talk about regarding those losses? Any of them just like insane in your eyes or really highlight?
Yeah, I think back 5 to 6 years ago, we wouldn't have seen this many upsets in this short span. It just speaks to the parity and how the game has grown so much, which is awesome. And there's a few on here, right? Michigan beats Minnesota. Michigan's been ranked already this year at some point. So there's a few teams that have held their own this year a little bit, maybe fallen out of that top 25 and came back and now have beaten teams in the top 25. It just shows that teams aren't giving up and are trying to go after it and trying to get better seeds and trying to take advantage of conference play. And I think that's great for our game to see some of this upset action.
Yeah, absolutely. So jumping into some of the big changes in the rankings, right? With these losses come some repercussions. Sometimes a loss could drop you down a couple seeds. So the two teams that moved down in the biggest fashion, Maryland, they had 2 losses to losing to UCLA and Texas. We've highlighted this to some degree. They had some issues with players being hurt. It was great to see Sellers come back that second game, but obviously just not the same team. So with those 2 weeks, they dropped 6 spots to the number 14 seed. West Virginia, who was recently moved in at the very end of the rankings and then made their way to the top, 16, top 15, with their loss, they dropped 5 spots to the number 21 spot. So 2 big shifts there. A lot of other folks went up and down, maybe 1 or 2, but dropping 5 to 6 spots, those are pretty big impacts. Now, just to highlight the ups, right? teams that moved up and that helped their cause here. Duke moved up 4 spots to the number 10. Ohio State moved up 4 spots to the number 8 with that big upset against Maryland. Texas moved up 2 spots to number 5. And Michigan State, who's been in and out of the rankings, they moved up 5 spots, and they are now ranked 16th. So all good stuff, a lot of movement here. It's going to keep fluctuating every week, but I just think this is a lot of movement and movement we haven't really seen based on those wins and losses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it speaks to conference play and what we've been talking about. That absolute grind, trying to win that thing out is tough to do. Okay, let's jump into our third quarter. So we wanted to talk about the Power Four conferences and the top of those Power Four conferences and some of those notable conference wins for those teams. And really, these 4 teams and these 4 conferences have really separated themselves. I don't think we're overly surprised by who these teams are, but I think we're kind of seeing a separation in 2 of these conferences really showing their dominance. And then there's the other 2 conferences we're going to talk about that maybe don't have as many good teams, and the depth maybe isn't there in those other 2. So the first team, and we've talked about them a ton even today, that we want to talk about is South Carolina in the SEC. So they're 8-0 in conference play. Some notable conference wins so far. They have been holding all 5 ranked opponents they played in January to an average of 29 points below their season averages. So it speaks to that dominance piece. And they've played some tough teams down the stretch here. They recently beat number 18 Tennessee, number 7 LSU, number 13 Oklahoma, number 22 Alabama, number 5 Texas. They've got UConn coming up on February 16th. They've got number 12 Kentucky, which is also an SEC team that they're playing on March 2nd. And then obviously we'll have the conference tournament, and they still have to win this thing out. But at this point, South Carolina, the fact that they've beaten the LSUs, the Oklahomas, the Texases, throw Tennessee in there if you want to also, they really are showing how dominant they are. And piece of that is their depth, right? And what they're able to do. And obviously Dawn being at the helm of that team and the experience that she brings and the system that they bring, they are just dominating right now in the SEC. What are your thoughts there, Becca?
Couldn't said it better myself. They're in a league of their own. They're champs for a reason. Their resume speaks for itself. And I just think the SEC is such a good conference this year to be 8-0 and to hold their teams below their average by 29 points. Like that's a crazy stat. 29 points below the season average for these teams. Do we understand that? Like it's going in there expecting to score 60 and you score like 31. That's insane. And I know that's not the actual, but I'm just giving an example. I just think it's absolutely crazy. They're definitely picking it up on the defensive end and kind of coming into stride. They had some blips in the beginning of the season with, Chloe Kitts kind of being out, Ashlyn Watkins coming in, then out, then tore ACL and is out. So it's good to see them in their flow. I really feel like South Carolina is in their flow.
Yeah, and we talked to their depth a lot, and you mentioned it here, their defense. And Dawn doesn't do anything crazy. They're playing a straight up man-to-man. You don't see any of these made up hoodoo defenses that teams try to throw out there sometimes. I mean, they're just straight up playing in the way they play together on defense, the way they guard screens, the way they rotate, the way they get back in transition, really making a difference. And they're just doing it the old school traditional way of playing defense.
Hey, it's not broke. Don't fix it.
There it is.
Keep rolling.
Dawn's like, let's do this.
Big Dawn's Eagles like, you will be in help side on your rotation.
Yep.
I will. Yeah, I will.
I guarantee in practice, they just drill on defense. You can see it. It translates right into the game. And their scouting report is a big piece of that too. You can tell that they're really prepared for a lot of teams that they play. The next one we wanted to highlight is UCLA in the Big Ten, their first year in the Big Ten. They are also 8-0 in conference play. They are 20-0 overall in the season. So they are that team that has beaten South Carolina, and they are that only team that is still undefeated of these big conferences here. So some of their notable wins in conference play, they've beaten number 14 Maryland pretty handedly, 82-67. That one we thought was going to be a little bit closer, and UCLA really took care of business there. They have a couple tough games coming up. So they play number 8 Ohio State on February 5th, and they play number 4 USC, which I'm like pumped for this game.
Yeah, can't wait.
On February 13th, day before Valentine's Day there. So they still have a couple teams left to go in conference play that could challenge them. But right now, Lauren Betts, Kiki Rice, what they're bringing, they are arguably the best team. They're ranked number 1 right now. Some people might lean towards South Carolina a little bit with their body of work and what they've done. But boy, is UCLA top dog right now.
Yeah, I just think when UCLA gave South Carolina their first loss, I think that just motivated South Carolina in the best possible way. And do you remember in the beginning of the season, they had some close calls while they were overseas in Paris, and Dawn was like, "Look, we're going to figure it out, or we're not." And then that loss, you can really tell they're rolling and learning how to get a lead, keep a lead, and just show that dominance. UCLA, though, I would love to see another one of these matchups. Obviously, it's not probably going to happen till tourney time. I really believe that. But man, is it going to be good. These are the two big juggernauts. This is big time post players, outstanding guard play, and consistency. That is what South Carolina and UCLA, in my opinion, is.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Solid team, and very excited to watch who they get stacked up against in the tourney here coming up. The next team we want to highlight is yours truly, Becca, Notre Dame, Fighting Irish. They are in the ACC. They are also 8-0 in conference play. Some of their bigger, more notable wins coming in their out-of-conference play, but honestly, some of the biggest wins on the season. So they've beaten UConn, USC, and Texas. And all three of those schools consistently have been in the top 10. So has Notre Dame. And it's been really cool to see Notre Dame and how they've grown since their losses to then take care of business in all 3 of those games. And I think that's very noteworthy for Notre Dame. They've also beaten North Carolina, who is ranked 17th by 10 points. They've beaten Georgia Tech, who's now ranked 17th. They were ranked 17th at the time by a score of 81-66. And we have to remember, leading up to that Georgia Tech game, they had lost the game prior, but prior to that, they were undefeated. Right? So Georgia Tech is a pretty good team there, and we had talked quite a bit about it. So that's a good win for Notre Dame. And now they're getting ready to play Duke, who's ranked 10th on February 17th, NC State, who's ranked 17th, again with the new rankings on February 23rd, and then they'll cap it off with those ranked teams in conference play against Florida State, who's ranked 25th on February 27th. Thoughts on this one, Becca, because this is yours. This is the Fighting Irish right here.
Yeah. So just looking at the ACC as a whole, we have a lot of teams that are in the top 25. I wouldn't say we have any that are, top 5 juggernauts that we have to knock out, but I think that's our notable out of conference wins, right? Having that USC, UConn, Texas dubs on our resume is super nice. What kind of terrifies me at the same time, we've talked about the grind. We've seen what happened just in the second quarter of this episode. I'm just going to tell you, having those 3 teams, Duke, NC State, and Florida State, all at the end of February, kind of back to back to back, it keeps me a little on edge because you never know what's going to happen. We had Hannah out for a while. I know she's back, but I still think we're trying to fully gel and then kind of get some of that consistency and getting a lead and putting teams away and capitalizing on it. Yes, we can do that against, the Georgia Techs or Virginia because we have Hannah and we have Liv that can run and run and run. But when you come across teams here who have nothing to lose and they're in the rankings and they're fighting for their spots, I'm on edge. I'm going to be watching it like a hawk, and I just want 3 W's. That would be great for me. But I think it's going to be tough. I absolutely think there's going to be tough fought games without a doubt.
Yeah, let's talk about those 3 teams. So Duke struggles a little bit on the offensive end with consistency, but they can bring it on the defensive end. So what trouble does that bring Notre Dame if Notre Dame's offense gets slowed down a little bit by Duke's great defense? Can Duke counter with some scoring on the other end? I don't know. That's going to be, I think, the wild card for that game. NC State, they played in a Final Four last year, not as strong as a season so far this year, but they've got some athletes on that team.
Yep.
I think that's not an easy one or a cakewalk by any means. per what you're saying here. And then Florida State has one of the best scorers in the country on Florida State. Do I think Florida State is anywhere near the caliber of Notre Dame? I don't, but it's still a tough opponent, and they still got some girls that can score, and if not the best, one of the best scorers in the country on Florida State's team. So that'll be an interesting to watch.
And what's more important is Notre Dame can't overlook any of these teams, and everybody has to come to every one of them and do their job at all 4 quarters. We've the highlight of I feel like almost every podcast episode is that one bad quarter, and that's all it takes. So everybody's got to be dialed in, got to kind of realize the mission is still the same and just keep going to work every day. As if you're the game's on the line, because honestly it is. And we've seen a lot of upsets this year, so I just don't want them to be one.
And you and I know what it feels like to be at the top of a conference where every team you play in conference thinks it's their Super Bowl to beat you.
Bullseyes all over. Yep.
Bullseyes all over. If Duke, NC State, or Florida State can come away with a W in that game, that's huge for their programs. So, yeah, absolutely. Notre Dame's got to take those seriously. Can't take a night off by any means. And then our fourth team we wanted to highlight is UConn in the Big East. Notable conference wins so far. They're 10-0, but they haven't really played in a tough conference this year. The Big East is weak. I think we're just going to flat out say it. It does not stack up against the SECs or the Big Tens. Arguably, we're kind of thinking the ACCs, not on the same caliber as the Big Ten or the SEC, but they're capable of it in certain years. But really, the Big East right now, not as strong. And so they're beating teams by 40, 60. Yeah. I mean, and that's UConn too, because they are that dominant, but there's nobody that's really stacking up to them. So they did play some noteworthy non-conference games, and that's where I think UConn is going to get tested and get better throughout the season. They played a very close game against USC at home. USC wins that one by 2. Coming up, UConn, like I mentioned, does play some tough non-conference games. They're going to play Tennessee, number 18, on February 6th. We had highlighted that game episodes ago at the very beginning as a good rivalry game to watch this year. I think that one's going to be an interesting one. And then they play South Carolina, number 2 South Carolina, there on February 16th. So they've got a couple tough, certainly with South Carolina, their opponents coming up in February that'll be worth watching for the UConn Huskies.
Yeah, just, again, have to get their notable wins outside of conference just because, they're rolling right now. 10-0, you mentioned it. I just think USC was a great game for them. It was a home game. They were at the XL Center. A lot of Juju's first time there, right? USC's first time probably over there. So a lot of excitement filled that gym. And, it was good for them to compete. Again, as you mentioned, USC won by 2, but the Big East, it is weak. Like there's probably, we looked a bit, there's like not another ranked team in it. So for them, these are important games coming up against Tennessee and absolutely against South Carolina. All right, heading up into our fourth and final quarter here, we're just going to highlight some games that are coming up this weekend. So Saturday, February 1st, tomorrow, number 24 Oklahoma State's going to play number 21 West Virginia. That's just going to be a good game. Oklahoma State, West Virginia are just 2 teams that are fighting to stay in the top 25. West Virginia's, they've been all as close as 16. We just mentioned them previously. They had a loss, so they dropped back to 25. Just going to be an all-in-all good game to kind of keep your rankings and stay within the top, however many you need to get a good seed for conference and the tournament.
I have to ask you, Becca, did you ever play at West Virginia?
Yes, I did play West Virginia.
Was it ruthless? Was the environment? I had one experience there. We played there, and it was just like the crowd was taunting us and screaming stuff, and it was just a crazy atmosphere. So I don't know if this game, I'd have to look. I'm not sure if this game's at West Virginia, but if it is, look out Oklahoma State.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you on the crowd front. I can't remember the girl on the team, her name off the top of my head, but at one point she was just killing us the first half, and they put her name and her score versus us on a board, and they just kept tabs, and it was so sad. It was, I think we might have even lost that game. I think I was a freshman or a sophomore. It's a tough environment. You're in this dome. They shoot off this musket. It's just rowdy. It is absolutely rowdy.
I think it's worth calling out because a lot of people maybe don't know that about West Virginia, but it is a tough environment.
Yeah, y'all are rowdy, that's for sure. Jumping to Sunday, February 2nd, we got a couple here. So we're highlighting the first two because they're top seeds that just need to take care of business. Number 3 ND plays Louisville. Always seems to be a tough team for us. That's always going to be a tough game. It doesn't matter if you're ranked, not ranked. It's a conference play. We always roll up the sleeves and kind of go to battle with Louisville. Jeff Walls has a young team on his hands, but it's do or die. They have nothing to lose, so Notre Dame just needs to take care of business. And then we have USC versus Iowa, which I'm interested to see just because, again, this is, as USC is kind of playing all these new Big Ten teams, it's always a good time to see how they react when they first initially play a new opponent. And Iowa's kind of scratching and clawing to get some wins and to break back into that top 25. So it's definitely going to be a good game. Interested to see them, and USC needs to take care of business there.
I'm excited about that one. I think Iowa needs this one. If they can pull this one off, it's huge for their season right now.
Yeah, without a doubt. One more game that I wanted to highlight that wasn't, that's a top ranked versus non. Number 9 TCU plays Iowa State. If you remember back to our first episode, Iowa State was preseason ranked like 6. They have completely fallen off, right? They got Audie Crooks. They have the assist queen. Like it's just, I think if any game, this game would be one for them to get back. TCU, they had an upset last week. And I think they might match up pretty well. Both teams have really good guards, point guards and shooting guards, and then they have a big presence inside. The difference is going to be how Sedona Prince and Audie Crooks guard each other, compete with each other, and just outrun each other up and down the floor. So we'll be interested to see how that one goes. And then our last matchup for Sunday is number 12 Kentucky is going to play number 13 Oklahoma. Now this is going to be a good top contender team here, right? You got a 12 versus a 13. Kentucky we've talked about here or there, but they've stayed middle of the pack. So respect is earned and given for sure. Oklahoma, they've had some losses. So for them, I think this is a redemption game to try to get back in that top 10 seed. What do you think, Sid?
Yeah, having watched Oklahoma a few times, more than Kentucky. I've only watched Kentucky twice, I think, at this point, but Oklahoma I've watched a handful of times. Oklahoma, to me, is more of that offensive team. They're going to sub a lot of people in. They like to run and gun. They, at one point, and they still might be, they were leading the nation in assists. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see what defensive game they throw at Kentucky to slow down a Georgia Amore and to stop Key inside and some of the players that Kentucky's got. I just think that's kind of an interesting matchup there. And then I think Kentucky is going to have to really figure it out defensively to stop Oklahoma and that offensive powerhouse that they have. So that's a good one to tune into on Sunday for sure.
Yep. And the last one is Monday, February 3rd, number 10 Duke versus number 17 NC State. Highlighting this one, just two top ranked teams here. I think we're going to mention and maybe see a bit of a offensive struggle here. I think it might be a relatively low scoring game unless somebody gets hot and they can just keep draining threes. And it's possible, right? Duke absolutely has resume and individuals that can do it. But I think it's going to be more of a defensive focused game, taking care of the ball and just really trying to who can outscore one another. I know that's the point of basketball, but they're both such low scoring teams. So it's going to be interesting. What do you think of this one, Sid?
Yeah, Duke's got Reagan, has kind of had an up and down season a little bit, but capable of bringing a lot on the offensive end if she wanted to. NC State, I think, has kind of had a letdown season. I think you have a letdown season when you're coming off of a Final Four season and you're consistently not winning those top matchups like they didn't throughout the whole first half of the season. So I think both teams, this game really matters for them and how they're going to be ranked overall in the ACC here. So it's going to be a tough battle, I think, for sure. I think NC State offensively brings a lot more to the game, and it's just going to be a matter of how much Duke can slow them down.
Can't wait to dive in, watch them, and chat with you about them after the fact.
Yeah, we'll have our popcorn out. We usually do.
That's for sure. So looking back at our first quarter, we highlighted this past Monday's game where South Carolina took care of business against Tennessee. We highlighted Kim Caldwell's gave birth to her son. Congrats. Our second quarter, we had some Underdog upsets. 7 ranked teams lost all on the same night, plus some, right? So big upsets there. Third quarter, we just talked about the Power Four and the dominance in the conference between UCLA, South Carolina, Notre Dame, and UConn. And then our fourth quarter, we highlighted some good games for you guys to watch this weekend because we're definitely going to be tuned in and talking about them on the next one.
Absolutely. And just a reminder to hit us up on our social medias. Leave us some comments and some questions for our team huddles. We've got a fun team huddle coming up that's going to drop sometime next week. Thinking Tuesday or Wednesday, not sure yet, but we've got another Notre Dame alum who's going to be joining us to answer a question from a fan. And I think it's going to be a fun one to answer. And then we've got a couple more that we want to tackle as well. So we've got a good huddle coming up next week that we want everyone to tune into and listen to. And as always, we appreciate you all listening to us and following and subscribing and liking what we're doing here. So thank you.
We appreciate y'all. Good to chat with you, Sid.
Always good to chat with you, Beck. Talk soon.
That's the 28.5 final buzzer for today's episode. Don't forget to hit follow and download on your preferred podcast platform to catch every play-by-play. New episodes drop each week throughout the season.
If you've enjoyed our courtside chat, drop us a review or follow us on our social media accounts where you can send us questions that may be selected for our Team Huddle Q&A episodes. And remember, from females who have played the game, the size of the ball matters.